Deep in the Sierra Nevada wilderness, silence is usually safe. But for 17-year-old Leo, one simple mistake turned that silence into a death sentence. A single flash of sunlight reflecting off his binoculars alerted a sniper miles away. The bullet missed his head by inches, only because his dog, Wolf, sensed it first. They did not just find a hiking trail, they stumbled upon a massive illegal mining operation digging up tons of stolen gold. Now, trapped without a signal, a father, a son, and their loyal dog must survive a ruthless hunt where the only rule is to leave no witnesses. The ancient pines of the Sierra Nevada forest towered overhead, creating a thick canopy that turned the midday sun into dappled patches of green and gold on the forest floor. The air here was thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. Jake paused on the rocky trail to adjust the straps of his heavy hiking backpack. At 45, the steep incline was familiar work for his muscles, though the gray stubble on his jawline hinted at the years that had passed since his prime. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and turned to look back. "Come on, Leo, keep up," Jake called out, his voice calm but carrying easily in the quiet woods. A few yards back, Leo dragged his feet through the dust. The 17-year-old looked out of place in the wilderness, clad in a dark blue hoodie that he refused to take off despite the exertion. His messy brown hair fell over his eyes as he stared intently at his phone, holding it high in the air in a futile search for a signal. "This is a dead zone, Leo," Jake reminded him, waiting for his son to close the gap. "No towers, just us." Leo let out a heavy sigh and shoved the phone into his jeans pocket. "It is unnatural to be this disconnected, Dad." Trotting silently between them was Wolf. The Silver Sable German Shepherd moved with an efficiency that contrasted with Leo's sluggish pace. His coat shimmered like smoke against the dark tree trunks. On his paws, Wolf wore rugged black fabric boots, a precaution Jake had insisted on to protect the dog's pads from the jagged granite shards that littered the trail. Suddenly, the rhythmic crunch of their boots was interrupted. Wolf stopped dead in his tracks. His ears, usually swiveling to catch the rustle of squirrels, pinned back tight against his skull. He lowered his head and let out a sharp, wet sneeze, shaking his snout vigorously. Jake froze. He knew every nuance of his dog's behavior. That was not a reaction to pollen. "What is it?" Leo asked, sensing the shift in his father's demeanor. "Quiet," Jake whispered. He wet a finger and held it up to the breeze. The wind was blowing up from the valley floor below. Jake inhaled deeply, filtering out the scent of pine needles. Then he caught it. Faint but distinct. It was the heavy, oily stench of burnt diesel fuel. "There shouldn't be any machinery out here," Jake murmured, his eyes narrowing. "This is a protected wilderness area." He signaled Wolf to heel. The dog obeyed instantly, pressing his side against Jake's leg. Jake led them off the marked trail, moving stealthily through the dense manzanita bushes toward the edge of a limestone ridge that overlooked a hidden depression in the landscape. They crept to the precipice and peered over the edge. Below them, the pristine silence of the forest was shattered by the low hum of industry. A large camouflage net had been strung up to hide the clearing from the air. Underneath, a group of men in hard hats were operating a massive, modern hydraulic winch. The machine groaned under tension as it dragged a rusted, century-old iron minecart out of a collapsed cave entrance. As the cart emerged into the sunlight, Leo gasped softly. Piled high inside the rotting iron frame were stacks of rectangular bars. They were dull with age and grime, but beneath the dirt they gleamed with an unmistakable yellow heaviness. It was gold. The discovery of the gold had stunned them into silence, but silence was not enough to keep them safe. Jake gripped Leo's shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric of the hoodie, signaling for absolute stillness. They were trespassers on a secret worth killing for, and the men in the valley below were clearly not amateur prospectors. Leo, however, was driven by a teenager's curiosity and the need to understand what he was seeing. Slowly, moving with agonizing caution, he raised a pair of compact binoculars to his eyes. He wanted a closer look at the dull yellow bars stacked in the rusty carts. As he adjusted the focus wheel, the afternoon sun shifted slightly through the pine canopy. A single intense beam of light struck the convex glass of the binoculars. To Jake, it happened in slow motion. A sharp flash of white light reflected off the lens, shooting across the valley like a signal flare. It cut through the shadows and struck the eyes of a figure standing on a makeshift watchtower on the far side of the excavation site. The sentry, a man silhouetted against the limestone cliff, turned instantly. He raised a long-range rifle, bracing it against the railing of the tower. Jake opened his mouth to shout, to tackle his son, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Wolf was not. The Silver Sable German Shepherd had been watching the valley with intense focus. His ears, capable of detecting frequencies far beyond human range, twitched. He heard the faint metallic click of a firing pin striking a primer from hundreds of yards away, a sound that traveled just ahead of the death it promised. Wolf did not bark. He did not growl. He launched himself from his crouched position with explosive power. His 80-pound frame collided squarely with Leo's chest. The force of the impact knocked Leo backward into the dirt, just as a terrifying sound tore through the air. A high-velocity crack echoed off the canyon walls, followed instantly by the sound of wood shattering. A bullet obliterated a chunk of pine bark exactly where Leo's head had been a second before. "Get down!" Jake hissed, grabbing Wolf's collar and dragging both the dog and his stunned son behind the cover of a large granite boulder. Leo was gasping for air, clutching his chest where Wolf had hit him. He looked at the tree trunk, staring at the fresh, white scar in the wood that was still smoking slightly. He looked at Wolf, who was standing over him, teeth bared towards the valley, his hackles raised in a ridge of silver fur. "They have a sniper," Jake said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "And if they are this organized, they have air support." He looked at their large hiking backpacks. They were filled with tents, sleeping bags, and food, but they were heavy and slow. "Leave the packs," Jake commanded, cutting the straps of his own bag with a pocket knife. "Take only the water bottles and the first aid kit. We need to move fast." "Where are we going?" Leo asked, his voice trembling as he scrambled to obey. Jake pointed toward a treacherous section of the landscape to their west. It was a labyrinth of sharp, jagged limestone formations known locally as the Razor Rocks. "Into the rocks," Jake said. "It is the only place their drones cannot see us. Move." Wolf took the lead, his booted paws finding purchase on the loose gravel, guiding his pack away from the open trail and into the unforgiving terrain of the stone forest. The forest floor trembled under the rhythm of their desperate sprint. Jake led the way, hacking through dense ferns with his arms to clear a path for Leo. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was getting louder, but it was not the heavy tread of boots. It was the rapid, frantic crashing of animals tearing through the underbrush. "They are releasing the dogs," Jake said, not slowing down. He cast a quick glance over his shoulder. Bursting through the foliage were two Belgian Malinois. They were sleek, fawn-colored missiles with black masks and intense, intelligent eyes. Younger and faster than Wolf, they moved with a terrifying, high-drive energy, their muscles rippling under short coats as they closed the distance. Leo stumbled, his breathing ragged. "Dad, they are going to catch us!" Jake scanned the terrain ahead. They were approaching a geological anomaly known as the Devil's Carpet. It was a vast expanse of jagged, razor-sharp shale and limestone shards that jutted out of the earth like broken glass. Jake looked down at Wolf. The Silver Shepherd was running steadily at his heel, panting but focused. Jake knew that in a direct physical confrontation, Wolf, at 5 years old, would be overwhelmed by two prime attack dogs. He had to rely on strategy, not brute force. "Wolf, decoy!" Jake shouted, pointing sharply toward the center of the jagged rock field. "Go!" Wolf did not hesitate. He understood the command perfectly. He broke formation, veering sharply to the left away from Jake and Leo. He let out a deep, challenging bark that echoed through the trees, instantly drawing the attention of the pursuing Malinois. Seeing the lone dog split off, the prey drive of the two Malinois took over. They ignored the humans and banked hard, scrambling over a fallen log to chase the silver dog. Wolf hit the edge of the Devil's Carpet at full speed. His paws, encased in the rugged black protective boots Jake had secured earlier that morning, struck the sharp stones with dull, rhythmic thuds. The thick rubber and fabric soles absorbed the impact and shielded his pads from the cutting edges. Wolf moved across the treacherous terrain with fluid grace, leaping from rock to rock like a mountain goat. The two Malinois followed him blindly, fueled by aggression. But the moment their unprotected paws struck the shale, the chase changed. A sharp, high-pitched yelp of pain pierced the air, followed by another. The razor-sharp rocks sliced into the soft pads of the pursuers. The lead Malinois skidded to a halt, whining and lifting a bleeding front paw. The second dog tried to continue, but flinched with every step, its aggression instantly replaced by confusion and pain. They barked in frustration, watching their target slip away, but they could not follow. Wolf reached the other side of the rock field unharmed. He paused on a high ridge, looking back at the disabled pack for a brief moment. Then, with a low chuff of satisfaction, he turned and circled wide through the trees to rejoin Jake and Leo, his tail wagging slowly. The temperature plummeted the moment the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada. In the high desert altitudes, the heat of the day evaporated instantly, leaving behind a biting, dry cold that seeped through layers of clothing. Jake, Leo, and Wolf moved under the cover of twilight, their breath forming faint clouds of vapor in the darkening air. High above them, a low, persistent mechanical hum drifted down from the sky. It was the thermal imaging drone, searching the forest floor like a predator's eye. It was looking for heat signatures, and out here in the cooling wilderness, 3 living bodies would glow like beacons on its screen. "We need cover," Jake whispered, scanning the cliff face. "Solid rock. That is the only thing that will mask our heat." Wolf trotted ahead, his nose working the air. He led them toward a patch of overgrown manzanita bushes that concealed a dark, timber-framed opening in the mountainside. It was the mouth of an abandoned mine shaft, a relic likely dating back to the gold rush of 1890. The wooden beams were gray and rotting, smelling of ancient dust and decay. "Perfect," Leo said, his teeth chattering slightly. "We can go deep inside. The drone will never see us." Leo moved to step across the threshold into the pitch-black tunnel. Suddenly, Wolf sprang forward. He planted his large silver body directly in Leo's path, effectively blocking the entrance. The dog did not bark, but a low, vibrating rumble emanated from his chest. The fur along his spine stood rigid, and he pushed his heavy shoulder against Leo's legs, forcing the boy to step back. "What is wrong with him?" Leo asked, looking down at the dog. Jake grabbed Leo's arm and pulled him further back. "Look at him, Leo. He is terrified of what is inside." Jake picked up a small stone and tossed it deep into the darkness of the shaft. The sound of it hitting the floor was dull and heavy, lacking the echo of a healthy open space. "It is bad air," Jake said grimly. "Old mines are death traps. Low oxygen, pockets of methane, or a roof ready to collapse. If we go in there, we might never wake up. Wolf just saved your life again." Instead of entering the suffocating depths, Jake pointed to a massive slab of granite that had fallen centuries ago, resting just outside the mine entrance. It formed a natural windbreak and a thick overhead shield. "Get behind the rock," Jake ordered. "It will block the wind and hide our thermal signature from the drone." They huddled together in the cramped space behind the boulder. The cold was intense, but they were hidden. Jake rummaged through his small first aid kit and found a single, squashed chocolate bar he had stashed for emergencies. He broke it into 3 equal pieces. He gave one to Leo, ate one himself, and held the last piece out for Wolf. The dog took it gently, then curled his body around Leo, acting as a living blanket. As they ate in silence, listening to the drone buzz harmlessly overhead, Leo looked at his father, then at the dog warming his legs. "You were right, Dad," Leo whispered, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "About patience, about observing. I would have walked right into that trap." Jake rested a hand on Leo's shoulder. "The wilderness does not forgive impatience, Leo. Tonight, we wait." Dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in streaks of violet and bruised orange. The silence of the forest was shattered by the coughing roar of a heavy diesel engine starting up. From their vantage point behind the boulder, Jake, Leo, and Wolf watched the activity below. A rugged military-grade transport truck had backed up to the excavation site. The men were preparing to load the gold bars. "If that truck leaves the valley, the evidence vanishes," Jake said, his voice low and gritty. "We cannot let them reach the main road." He turned to Leo. "The drone is the problem. It is their eye in the sky. I need you to blind it." Jake handed Leo the small rectangular signal mirror from their first aid kit. He pointed to the drone pilot, a man standing on a raised platform near the truck wearing virtual reality goggles and holding a controller. "Wait for the sun to crest the ridge," Jake instructed. "Aim for his face. I will handle the machinery." Leaving Leo and Wolf hidden in the shadows of the mine entrance, Jake moved. He did not run. He flowed through the underbrush, timing his movements with the noise of the engines. He circled the perimeter until he reached the back of the massive hydraulic winch that was holding the heavy minecart on the incline. Jake pulled his survival knife from its sheath. The blade was dull from use, but strong. He located the primary hydraulic pressure line, a thick black hose pulsing with fluid. With a grimace of effort, he sawed into the rubber. A sharp hiss erupted as pressurized fluid sprayed out, coating the ground in slick, dark oil. The tension in the cable holding the heavy cart began to slacken imperceptibly. Next, Jake moved to the idling transport truck. The driver was out of the cab, helping with the loading. Jake unscrewed the oil filler cap on the engine block. He scooped up a handful of gritty, abrasive sand from the ground and poured it directly into the engine's heart. It was a death sentence for the motor. Within minutes of running hard, the pistons would seize. High above on the cliffside, Leo watched the drone buzzing closer to his father's position. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the rising sun, then at the mirror in his trembling hand. He angled the glass, catching a beam of intense morning light. He adjusted his aim, finding the drone pilot on the platform. "Now," Leo whispered to himself. He tilted the mirror. A brilliant, concentrated flash of sunlight struck the pilot directly in the face. The man cried out in surprise, ripping the goggles from his eyes and stumbling backward, blinded by the sudden glare. In his panic, his thumb jerked on the control stick. The drone pitched violently to the left. It slammed into the granite cliff face with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal, spiraling down into the trees in a shower of sparks. The sabotage took effect instantly. With the hydraulic pressure gone, the massive steel cable holding the antique minecart snapped with a sound like a whip crack that echoed across the canyon. Deprived of its anchor, the heavy iron cart, loaded with tons of gold bars, began to roll backward down the steep wooden track. It gathered speed rapidly, the wheels screeching against the rusted rails until it derailed at the bottom of the slope. The cart tumbled into the ravine with a deafening, thunderous crash that shook the ground beneath their feet, sending a cloud of dust and debris billowing into the air. In the ensuing chaos, the ringleader, a man with a sharp, cold face and immaculate tactical gear, scanned the perimeter frantically. His eyes locked onto Jake, who was emerging from the cover of the machinery. Realizing his operation was ruined, the man's expression twisted into a mask of pure rage. He reached to his belt and drew a black service pistol, raising it toward Jake. Wolf did not hesitate. From the cover of the manzanita bushes, the Silver Sable German Shepherd launched himself like a coiled spring. He moved in complete silence, a gray blur against the dust. He did not attack the man's throat or face. His training was precise. Wolf's powerful jaws clamped firmly onto the man's right wrist, the one holding the weapon. He bit down hard, not to maim, but to disarm. The ringleader cried out in pain and shock, his grip failing. The pistol clattered uselessly onto the rocky ground. Having neutralized the immediate threat, Wolf released his grip instantly and bounded back, positioning himself between the man and Leo, his hackles raised and a low, warning rumble vibrating in his chest. Jake seized the opportunity. He charged forward, tackling the distracted man to the ground. With the practiced efficiency of his former life, Jake twisted the man's arm behind his back and secured him with a zip tie found in the man's own belt. "It is over," Jake said, his breathing heavy but controlled. Leo stepped out from his hiding spot, his hands trembling slightly. He held the orange emergency flare gun they had packed in their survival kit. He pointed it toward the patch of open sky above the canyon, and pulled the trigger. A sharp hiss cut through the air as a brilliant red streak shot upward, exploding into a blinding magnesium star that hung suspended against the blue morning sky. Minutes later, the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades filled the valley. A helicopter bearing the emblem of the park rangers descended, followed by ground units in off-road vehicles. Armed officers swarmed the site, securing the remaining mercenaries who had been too stunned by the crash to flee. An hour later, the adrenaline had finally faded. Jake, Leo, and Wolf sat on the tailgate of a Ranger pickup truck. A paramedic was checking a small scratch on Jake's arm, while Wolf rested his head contentedly on Leo's knee. Nearby, agents were cataloging the recovered gold bars, stacking them like ordinary bricks. Leo watched the shimmering pile, shaking his head slowly. That gold? It looks so heavy. Jake followed his son's gaze. He reached out and ruffled the fur behind Wolf's ears, then placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "The gold is just rock, Leo," Jake said softly, a tired smile touching his lips. The heaviest thing in that valley was their greed. "We are leaving here with everything that actually matters." Leo smiled, leaning into his father's side as the morning sun finally warmed the cold desert air. They were light, they were safe, and they were together. Here is the trick and impactful. Sometimes we chase after gold only to realize that the true treasure has been walking beside us all along. Wolf reminded us that when the world gets dark and cold, loyalty is the only light we need to find our way home. If this journey warmed your spirit, please leave a like and subscribe to help us tell more stories like this. We would love to read about your own four-legged protectors in the comments below. To keep the adventure going, simply click the video appearing on your screen now and let us discover the next mystery together.